Mark Holloway, a soldier still carrying fresh scars of war, stood on the porch, his finger trembling against a faded family photo in his wallet. Inside, his daughter Emily sat hunched at the table, her birthday cake crushed under an unseen hand. A cold voice cut from the living room, "You don't say a word." When Mark pushed the door open, Emily's eyes met his, a silent plea. "Tell me, could you turn away when a child looks at you like that, begging you to stay?" Mark Holloway's old pickup turned down the back road, tires crunching over a thick carpet of fallen leaves. The sound was sharp, uneven, like a tune that couldn't find its rhythm. On both sides, weathered wooden fences stood leaning, a few boards warped and broken, left to rot through storms no one had bothered fixing. The little town appeared in the distance, worn down, porches dusted over, windows lit faint with oil lamps, the air touched with wood smoke drifting from sagging eaves. The autumn wind whistled through the branches, sending leaves spinning before slapping against the windshield. Mark blinked, swiped at the glass with the back of his hand, like brushing away a memory. But the fear rising in him didn't come from the empty streets or the early night settling in. It came from inside. The fear of never shaking off the war, of this town, this old house, pressing its finger straight into every wound he thought had healed. His hands clamped the wheel, knuckles white, veins standing up. The flashes came again, nights of fire and noise, shouts breaking apart in the dark, the sky split open by blasts. His heart kicked hard, ready to break loose. This quiet road, harmless to anyone else, dragged him back into the wreckage of memory. Every crunch under his tires sounded like boots striking gravel during a forced march. He took a deep breath, pulling himself back. Smoke drifted in through the open crack of the window, wood burning somewhere far off. And the sharpness of it dried his throat. He knew well enough he wasn't on a battlefield anymore. Still, the fear lived in him, crouched like a wild animal, waiting for the smallest sound to come tearing out. Rounding a bend, he saw fields of corn already cut, the gray stubs sticking up like bones in wet soil. The sky had gone copper, the sun sinking behind low hills. The whole place seemed to curl in on itself, an old body bracing for winter. And him, a man just returned, felt like a crack in the picture. A stray dog shot from an alley, barked short and sharp, then disappeared into brush. Mark flinched, foot jamming the brake too hard, the truck rocking sideways. Sweat broke along his temple. He sat there, breathing heavy, staring at the empty spot the dog had vanished into. One sound, and every muscle in him had snapped tight. In that second he knew, he'd never really left the war. It lived in him still, in his reflexes, in the way his heart pounded. The truck rolled forward again. In the rearview, a faint trail of dust drifted into the air, breaking apart slow. It reminded him of the men he'd lost, names gone, faces fading, survivors only in his memory, like that dust after a march. His chest tightened, grief and fear mixed together, afraid no one would ever truly understand if he tried to speak it. The road into town narrowed. Low wooden houses lined the way, gardens gone wild. A few porches had pumpkins set out, signs of a holiday coming, but the emptiness made it feel more hollow than warm. Memories flooded him, running here as a boy, laughter of friends, the smell of ripe apples from someone's yard. It all looked the same. And not the same at all. That was another fear. War wasn't the only thing he couldn't outrun. The town had changed. Maybe it didn't have a place for him anymore. He tapped his fingers on the wheel, quick, restless. The sound echoed in the small cab like a jittery heartbeat. Then he stopped. Silence stretched. Outside, wind pressed harder, leaves slapping the glass as if trying to block the way ahead. In that stifling moment, Mark knew he had to choose, let fear eat him alive, or step out and face it. He drew a long breath, loosened his grip. Eyes steady now, looking forward. The road ahead, crowded with memories or not, was still leading him where he had to go. Knowing the past didn't knock him down anymore. It was a mirror, forcing him to see what he'd lost and what he still had left. The truck jolted over a pothole. Mark sat upright, his back stiff as iron. This time he didn't let his pulse race wild. He let it slow, heavy but steady. Strength didn't feel like charging into battle, it felt like staying in the seat, letting the truck roll down these old roads, no matter how loud the echoes in his head. As the town came into view, street lamps flickering with weak yellow light, Mark knew the truth. The biggest fight wasn't out there anymore. It was in him. And right here, on this autumn road, he'd finally started to learn how to meet it head-on. The old pickup came to a stop in front of the house he knew too well. When the engine cut off, the silence pressed in heavy. Mark stayed behind the wheel, his hand still gripping it like he hadn't gotten the signal to let go. The house stood in the fading light, roof patched with stains, steps worn gray, a wind chime rusted and squeaking in the breeze. The whole place looked covered in the dust of years, familiar, but strange, and enough to make his chest tighten with a kind of nameless fear. And then he saw the girl. Emily stood on the porch, her little shoulders shaking. She was holding a lopsided birthday cake, frosting smeared off the sides like it had been dropped, or maybe no one had the patience to set it straight. A few crooked candles leaned, waiting to be lit. Her faded cotton dress hung long over her wrists. Wind had her hair in tangles, strands stuck against her cheek. The sight of her stopped him cold, made him ache, and at the same time, made him feel like an outsider looking in on the family scene he should have been part of. Emily looked up. Brown eyes met his, but she didn't yell, didn't run. There was happiness there, but something else too, like if she moved too quick, the whole thing might fall apart, like that cake in her hands. Mark's heart pinched. He wanted to throw the door open, scoop her up. But his legs stayed locked. Past and present twisted together, choking him up. The front door snapped open. That sound cracked the quiet, followed by Clara's voice, sharp, cold, cutting right through. "Emily! Get inside. Don't stand out there making a scene." The words hit like a blade. Emily flinched, loosened her grip, the cake tilted, white frosting dropping onto the old boards. She ducked her head, like shrinking herself might soften the anger rolling her way. Mark's chest clenched tight. The fear inside him flipped, turned into something else. Anger, old and raw, something he hadn't let himself feel in years. But he didn't move yet. He sat in the dimming cab, watching, forcing himself to take a breath before the past swallowed his reflexes whole. Clara's voice echoed in his head, tangled up with the bark of old orders and shouts from another life. He was scared, not of her, but of himself. Afraid Emily would see not a father, but a man exploding. On the porch, Emily still clutched the broken cake. Her eyes lifted again to his. This time, what showed there wasn't just shyness, it was a trembling kind of hope. Like she wanted, just for 1 second, to believe he'd step out and save the moment before it was nothing but yelling and spilled frosting. Mark swallowed hard and pushed the door open. The creak of it carried across the quiet yard, even made Clara pause inside. He stepped out slow, gravel crunching under his boots like a drumbeat. The cold air slapped his face, but he paced himself, steadying his breath, keeping his heart from boiling over. Emily's hands shook as he drew near. The cake quivered with her. At the bottom step he stopped, not hugging her yet, not glancing at Clara in the dark doorway. He looked only at the small hands holding onto that ruined cake, proof of her trying, clumsy as it was, to keep a piece of joy alive. Right there, Mark knew his worst fear wasn't just behind him. It was here, in not knowing how to protect Emily, in the weight of all the letdowns he'd already left on her shoulders. He'd been gone too long, left a gap Clara filled with cold commands. Now he was back. Was he enough to mend it? A dry leaf fell onto the frosting spilled on the boards. Mark bent down, picked it up, his fingers catching the sticky sweetness gone cold in the wind. He brushed it aside and quietly took the cake from Emily's hands, his own warm and steady. Her lashes flickered, her breath still shaky, but eased a little. Behind them, Clara's voice cut again, sharp. But Mark didn't turn. He planted his feet firm on the porch, cake in one hand, the tremble of his daughter in the other. In that moment, he didn't need to shout, didn't need to fight. Strength meant standing his ground, facing Emily, the cold shadow behind the door, and the echoes of fear still beating in him. The daylight sank away. The rusted wind chime swung, casting a weak glow against his face. And in that light, he wasn't just a soldier haunted by the past. He was a father, standing in the chill, choosing to stay, no matter the battles waiting ahead. And Emily, pressed close to him, seemed to know it. Mark lunged forward and wrapped Emily in his arms. The crooked cake in her hand slipped a little, cold frosting smearing onto the sleeve of his worn jacket. Her small hand was ice cold, fingers curled tight, like she'd been holding onto something all day just to keep it from breaking. He lifted her off the porch, her weight nothing compared to the fear pressing down inside his chest. Wind rattled the tin roof, the old wind chime squeaked, and the mix of wood smoke and sugar frosting cut sharp in his nose. He pushed the door open and stepped in. Inside, the light was harsh, the kind of pale buzz you get from a single fluorescent bulb dangling overhead. Its whine worked into his ears like needles. The kitchen opened up with cracked linoleum underfoot, a damp rag by the sink smelling of bleach. The fridge hummed in steady pulses, magnets shaped like corncobs stuck on the door, a calendar still flipped to last month, Emily's birthday circled in red ink that had bled into the paper. On the counter, a chipped plate leaned sideways, smeared with frosting and crumbs dragged like tire marks. He set Emily down on a high wooden chair. The light fell across her small face, showing how pale the cold had left her. Then it caught her wrist, where a bruise spread out, uneven, branching under her skin. Mark froze. It felt like someone had clamped both hands around his chest from behind. His breath staggered, heavy and rough. Old images rushed back, bodies dropping, blood-soaked bandages, nights under flashing medical lights. He blinked hard, once. Opened his eyes again. No alarms, no battlefield. Just his daughter, and that bruise, right here in the kitchen. Clara stood in the doorway, arms folded tight across her chest. Her nails were painted a chipped brown, sweater pulled high at the neck. She swallowed, throat moving, but said nothing. Her silence made the room colder. On the counter, a matchbox sat next to 3 small candles, like someone had thought about lighting them but stopped. Mark didn't give her a second look. He turned back, twisted the faucet, let water run. The sound filled the kitchen. He soaked a rag, wrung it until just damp. Then he knelt level with Emily. His big, calloused hand stretched out. Her small one landed on it. He pressed the rag to her wrist. She flinched at the cold, but he held it steady, thumb bracing, the other hand cradling her arm as gentle as you'd hold a seedling. No words. Just the hum of the bulb, the fridge, the tick of the wall clock, each second dragging. The bruise darkened under the wet cloth. He stared until time seemed to slip past him. A cruel thought cut him. How many of these bruises had shown up when he wasn't here? He glanced around, door frames, tables, the porch step. Could be accidents. Could be something else. He didn't decide. Didn't assume. Just saw the truth, purple and raw, right in front of him. He swapped the rag for a fresh soak. Emily's breathing eased. Her little fingers uncurled, pale nails leaving half-moon marks. One fingertip still carried a sugar bead from the ruined cake. Something inside Mark softened. He set the rag down, pulled up a low chair close, sat beside her. The counter still held the empty cake box, grease stains blotting the paper lining. A frosting knife sat sticky, hardened sugar clinging to it. He picked it up, not to cut more cake, just to give his hands a small job, something to stop the tremor down his back. Wind whistled through the cracks, the chime clanged outside. Somewhere a window banged shut. Clara stayed in the doorway, her shadow stretching. She shifted, looked like she might speak, then didn't. Mark kept his eyes on Emily's wrist. In his past life, a wound meant quick orders: bandage, stitch, needle, stretcher. Here, the order was different: stay, breathe, hold a rag, wait for the cold to do its work. He searched for warmth. Found an old tin of cocoa on the shelf. He boiled water slow, stirred in powder, let the smell rise sweet and heavy. He poured it into a chipped mug, blew on it, set it in front of Emily. Then he slid the 3 candles beside it. 1, 2, 3. Wicks black, never lit. Emily pulled the cup close, cradling it in her good hand. The light caught her lashes, clumped from wind and dust. Mark didn't ask questions. He poured a second cup and set it in front of Clara. She didn't touch it. That was fine. The cup steamed anyway, a small bridge laid down between them. On the kitchen doorframe, pencil marks still climbed. E5, E6. The space for the last year stood blank. Mark stared at it, that gap hitting like a punch. He'd been gone exactly that long. A missing year, stretched across his daughter's growing. He pressed his finger to the frame, felt the grit of dust, then let it go. The past wasn't coming at him now with explosions. It was coming through faint pencil lines. And he knew he had to face it. He turned back. The bruise was still there, but the edges looked softer. From a cabinet he pulled a strip of gauze. Every small-town kitchen had a box somewhere. He wrapped it loose around her wrist, clipped it off neat. His hands clumsy, but the job solid. Then he rested his palm on her head, letting it stay. Her hair was sun-bleached, rough at the ends. Clara stepped forward half a pace. Her eyes flicked to the bruise, then to the knife in Mark's hand. He set it down, handle toward himself. Picked up the matches, struck one. Flame flickered weak but real. He touched it to the candles, one by one. The light grew warm, gold mixing into the cold white. The kitchen changed its voice. The bruise looked less harsh in that glow. He slid the ruined cake to the center. Left it as it was, uneven, broken. No fixing it. Some things stayed crooked. He tapped a finger lightly on the table, a steady rhythm instead of words. Emily watched the candles, lips warming pink again. In his mind, a memory stirred, an old buddy whispering in the jungle, breathe. Count to 4. Look at what's right in front of you. He didn't speak it, but it lived in him. And right in front of him now was this, the table, the cocoa, 3 flames, a wrist wrapped gentle, and a pair of brown eyes holding his. The clock ticked over the hour. His body, always waiting for a command, finally eased. Shoulders, neck, letting go. The fear hadn't vanished, but it wasn't steering his hands anymore. He understood, slow and steady, that courage wasn't shouting or breaking things. It was knowing what to do in the smallest of moments, warm a hand, press a rag, light 3 candles in a cold kitchen. The wind outside eased. The chime quieted. Clara turned her head away, eyes closing a moment. No apology came. None was asked for. The flames burned anyway, painting gold strokes on the walls. Mark slid a chipped plate in front of Emily, cut a slice of cake, not square, not round, just enough. Set it by her bandaged wrist, careful like laying down a promise. She leaned close, breathed in cocoa, sugar, candle smoke. Firelight flickered in her eyes. Somewhere in the house, a loose cord knocked the wall. A car passed down the street, fading. The town's silence settled again, not empty, but like a cupped hand holding a small coal alive. Mark pulled his chair nearer, blocking the harsh white glow, letting the candlelight cover her instead. It showed the lines around his own eyes, carved by years of grit. He leaned in, listening to everything, the drip, the tick, the breath. Inside, something shifted. Not a knife cut, but a tide coming slow. He saw his fear plain, saw what he dodged, and how he had to face it. The candles burned steady. No rush. No words needed. The kitchen held still like a photograph that breathed. At the edge of it, the bruise was there but not the whole picture. At the center, a small hand warming. Behind it, a man sitting straight, learning how to stay. When Emily's trembling eased, Mark noticed his finger had stopped tapping. His hands lay open now, ready to catch whatever came next, a sliding plate, a dying flame, or some old memory trying to crawl back. The fear was still with him, but he'd outlasted it this time. And in the glow, white mixed with gold, he understood, this night wasn't a battle to win or lose. It was a test to see if he could stay. Outside, the leaves thinned in the wind. Inside, the bruise lay still under gauze. The candles burned halfway, flames smaller but steady. Mark nudged the cocoa cup closer to Clara. Just a small gesture. No demand. Then he turned back to Emily, held her hand, felt the warmth seep back like a buried stream finding its way again. Somewhere inside, a beat rose, not frantic now, but deep, steady, and lasting. He let it lead him forward. Right in front of him, stuck to the fridge with a corn-shaped magnet, was a wrinkled sheet of paper. The words hit him hard. No talking during meals. Housework done by 6 p.m. The letters were big and stiff, drawn heavy and straight like someone had dragged a ruler across every line. No curves, no softness. It didn't look like a family note, the kind that says buy milk or don't forget the birthday. This was a command. A rule nailed down inside 4 kitchen walls, cold enough to make the air, already heavy, feel like a wire stretched too tight. Mark just stood there, eyes locked on the paper. The feeling was too familiar. It was like staring at the rule board in a training camp, where every word was in order and breathing room didn't exist. The memory slammed back, the glare of a flashlight in a canvas tent, a wooden sign nailed in the dirt, obey immediately, no questions. Back then, orders kept him alive. But here, in a family kitchen, it felt like a blade dragged across his skin. He turned his head toward Emily. She was curled up in her chair, holding her cocoa cup, eyes fixed on the white gauze wrapped around her wrist as if staring at it was easier than looking at her father, or at those words on the fridge. Her small, silent face reflected Mark's own fear. All the years he'd been gone had left a hole where rules like this had taken root. The room seemed to shrink. The buzz of the fluorescent grew sharper, the clock ticked long and slow, drilling into the silence. Clara still stood in the doorway, arms locked tight, eyes on him. That look, part challenge, part defense, said loud and clear that one wrong move from him and the fight she'd been waiting for would finally break loose. Mark drew a long breath. His chest tightened, his hand pressed flat on the table until the knuckles went white. He knew the line he was standing on: either let the anger take over, or wear silence like armor. He chose silence. But in it, the memories kept coming: long nights away from home, young soldiers bent over MRE packs, nobody daring to speak under the sign, keep quiet, discipline first. He stepped forward, touched the paper. His rough finger ran down its cold surface, like brushing an invisible wall. He didn't rip it down. Didn't pull it loose. Just traced the first word, a word that seemed to choke the air right out of the house. Emily looked up, brown eyes flickering with a faint light, mixed with fear. For a split second, she seemed to hope he'd do something: tear it down, crumple it, or at least make it tremble. But Mark's hand stayed there, steady. He knew, if he ripped it down right now, it wouldn't just be paper falling. It would be the whole house exploding. And he wasn't ready for Emily to see that kind of collision. Clara let out a small laugh, short and sharp, no words in it. The sound broke and vanished quick, like a draft through the room. Mark heard it clear, but he didn't answer. He went back to the table, pulled out a chair, and sat beside Emily. He wasn't going to fight the paper with an outburst. He'd fight it by staying right here, rooted in the kitchen that was trying to push him out. The ruined birthday cake sat on the table, candles snuffed, thin smoke curling in the draft. The smoke drifted, touched the paper on the fridge, brushed across those stiff letters like a reminder. Every rule, given enough time, fades. Mark cut a piece of cake, set it on a small plate, slid it toward Emily. He didn't say a word. She hesitated, then nodded, took a small bite. Crumbs fell on the table near his hand. He left them there, let them stay, proof of real life, not neat, not perfect, but alive. The wind outside softened to a low whistle. Clara still stared, but her shoulders sagged a little. Not surrender, just a crack in the hardness, a flicker of tiredness showing through. Mark sat still, felt his own body start to loosen after the long day. The old fear was still there, but it didn't rule him this time. In front of him was the paper on the fridge, his daughter's wary eyes, Clara's cold silence. And inside it all, he saw he had another choice: not to blow up, not to walk away, but to stay, sit, and slowly warm the room by simply being there. Emily chewed slow, swallowed, took a sip of cocoa. Her eyes flicked to the fridge again. Mark tapped his finger on the table, 1, 2. As if giving her an answer. She understood. Her chin dipped, lips pressed tight, but the trembling eased. Above them, the light flickered once, dimmed, then came back strong. For a second, the shadows on the paper twisted, the letters warping, no longer sharp and straight. Mark saw it, and the thought came quiet: no rule lasts forever. No fear stands unshaken. He leaned back in the chair, let out a long breath. Not giving up, choosing not to let the anger lead. In the tightness of that room, he sat like stone, patient, showing Emily that sometimes strength means holding steady, not backing off. And the paper on the fridge stayed there. But it wasn't the center of the room anymore. Mark didn't blow up right away. He chose silence. The smell of cocoa still clung to his sleeve as he stepped from the kitchen into the living room, like a man moving through heavy air. The old rug at the entry was worn and crooked, darkened where wet boots had once been dropped. The armchair, covered in faded floral cloth, was rubbed smooth on the arms, the springs groaning a little when he sank into it. He reached for the newspaper on the coffee table, its corners curled, ink carrying that metallic scent, front page crumpled from a rushed hand. He opened it, pretending to read, eyes skimming bold print but holding nothing. His pupils, stubborn, kept drifting back to the house itself, the gap of the room, the kitchen doorway glowing with harsh white, and the small figure perched at the edge of a chair, Emily, her bandaged wrist resting on her lap, her other hand cupped around the warm cocoa like it was the only light she had left. On the wall, the porcelain clock painted with wheat fields ticked slow, each beat like water dripping on metal, cold and exact. The heater kicked once, then hummed. The ceiling light was off. Only the table lamp in the corner gave a yellow circle across the carpet, enough to catch the crumbs still clinging to Emily's shoes, carried in from what was supposed to be her birthday. Clara passed through the doorway, one arm wrapped across the other, sweater pulled high at the throat. Her steps weren't heavy, just quick, like someone who lived by fridge rules. She stopped a second, her eyes brushing over Mark in the armchair. No words. Just a pressed lip, then she slipped back into the kitchen. Plates clinked, sharp and brittle. The sound skimmed across Mark like pebbles tossed on water ripples, but nothing breaking. The paper in his lap was open to classifieds. Small blocks of text fighting for space between ads for roofing jobs and lawn tools. One line jumped out: driver needed for morning route, cash weekly. He let it slide past, like a dry twig down a stream. He folded the page back. Not yet. His work wasn't out there. His work was here. Holding silence long enough for the storm to settle into something you could breathe inside of. Emily sat tilted forward, back not touching the rest. She sipped slow, set the cup down, her fingers resting longer than needed on the rim, soaking in the last of its warmth. The bandaged wrist slowed her movements. Each time the spoon clinked against the cup, she flinched, then went still, eyes locked on the edge of the rug. Mark watched all of it the way a soldier watches the grass for wind shifts, early warnings, signs of what's unsaid. He lowered the paper just enough for a clear line of sight. His breath fell into a rhythm: 4 in, hold, 4 out, hold. Old drills from another life, built for surviving chaos. Tonight, he used them to survive quiet. His nose caught the stale smoke from the heater, his eyes followed a hairline crack running down the wall from the window, his ears took in the whistle sneaking through loose panes. Ordinary things. Ordinary to the point of menace, because ordinary could hide sharp edges. Clara came back, shut off half the kitchen lights, leaving only a strip of cold glow. The paper still clung to the fridge, bold letters half in shadow. She moved about crisp, folding cloths, rinsing the knife, lining things up neat. Passing through again, she set a thin blanket on the armrest of his chair without looking at him. Have it, maybe. Mark didn't thank her. He just pulled the blanket over Emily's legs. She startled a little, then stilled, her shoes knocking together with a soft clack. The living room window looked out on the yard. Leaves swirled under the street lamp, caught, then dropped. Yellow light filtered through thin curtains, streaking across the wall, over Emily's cheek, across Mark's shoulder. He shifted, blocking the draft. The newspaper made soft waves as he turned it, the sound no louder than a weak tide. In his head, a tent rose up. Knights on guard, men splitting watch, one awake, one dozing. No talking. Eyes on the horizon. Counting the breathing of the living. He remembered snapping once when a kid dropped a magazine, the metal clanging like thunder. His anger burst like a safety off. That night he learned the hard way: rage doesn't shorten the night. It only blinds you. After that, he learned to sit still, listen sharper, choose the right time to speak, if ever. Tonight, this room was his watch. Emily's hand drifted to her bandage, checking it was still there. Mark leaned, pulled a cushion, set it behind her back. Didn't touch the bruise. Didn't ask. Just eased her. She leaned slightly, giving some weight up. On the table sat a stub of pencil beside an envelope unsent. Mark picked it up, turned it, then set it back. With his thumb he pressed a faint word into the paper's edge, so small he nearly missed it himself, stay. Just to remind himself. Clara flicked on the TV, volume low. Faces smiled without sound. A ticker scrolled, cold snap coming by week's end. Mark glanced, thought practical, cold meant longer nights, pipes could freeze, the heater might sputter. He filed it away, checked the drain in the morning, stuffed the door cracks tonight. Small jobs. Quiet ones. Things that warm a house by half a degree. The clock ticked toward 6. Housework done by 6 still blared from the fridge, its shadow stretching through the doorway like some bureaucrat's ghost. Emily looked at it, then down at her hand. Mark set his paper aside, stood, gathered scraps off the table, a candy wrapper, crumbs, a coaster knocked askew. He carried them to the kitchen, tossed them, rinsed a chipped plate. Came back and put it away. No noise, no fuss. Just done. Emily's shoulders loosened, like she'd cleared an invisible wall. Clara watched. Her eyes narrowed a second, not anger, maybe confusion, then turned away. Tiredness crossed her face, faint but there. Maybe she'd gone too far down the path of rules and was caught in them herself. Mark saw it the way you see a fine crack in plaster, can't patch it yet, but you know winter will spread it if you don't. He sat again, pulled the blanket tighter around Emily. She tilted, lids slow. The weight of the day and a lost birthday pressed her down. Mark tugged the lampshade so its glow missed her eyes. The TV moved on to something else, sound still a breath. The heater hummed steady. The living room fell into a slow rhythm. The storm in his chest, the one that hammered when he first saw the bruise, didn't vanish. It pulled back, hung like a heavy cloud at the edge. He let it stay there, watched it from a distance. He knew a reckoning would come with questions, confrontations. But not now. Not while his daughter sat bundled with a half-empty cup of cocoa. Not with fridge rules hanging like barbed wire. He chose the old tactic, hold ground, build a small fire, wait for dawn. By 6:30, Emily was nodding off. Her head tipped, brushing his sleeve. Mark laid the paper down, hands open, no weapons, no shields. He watched her lashes twitch and sleep, a thin rest taking hold. A streak of frosting still clung at her lip. He dabbed it away with a napkin, careful not to wake her. His other hand rested open on the chair arm, ready to steady whatever slipped, plate, candle, or memory. Clara clicked off the TV. The wind rattled the chime outside, one low note. She passed through, paused 2 beats. Lavender soap drifted past. No words. Mark looked up. Their eyes caught, not hostile, not reconciled. Just 2 grown people seeing the truth asleep between them, a child, wrist bandaged, house too sharp at the edges. Mark reached, turned off the lamp. The yellow glow gave way to streetlight gray. In the softer dark, Emily's breathing was even, like waves at the shore. He pulled the blanket up to her chin. The air still smelled of cocoa, paper, old cloth warmed too late in the sun. He sat upright, steady. The cord in his chest slackened. Somewhere deep inside, a marker had been planted. He could sit here without blowing apart, he could stay clear-eyed in silence. He could stand guard over a house the same way he once stood guard on a line, eyes open, hands empty. He could start being a father again from the smallest thing, watching over his daughter's sleep. Outside, the wind shifted. Leaves caught, turned, then dropped still. In the kitchen, the paper on the fridge stayed stuck under its corn magnet. But now, in the dark, it was just a square of white. No longer sharp enough to split the night in 2. In the living room, a man rested his hands on his knees, eyes steady, guarding a small flame, the flame of simply being there. And in its light, the the fear peeled back, not war anymore, but the fear of not being enough. He looked it in the eye. And it stepped back. The clock struck the hour. The second hand swept on. Mark lowered his head, whispered in his chest, not aloud, "Here. Stay. Morning will come." And he sat there, solid as stone, until Emily's breathing carried the silence, filling the house with something that could finally hold. The phone buzzed once, its black screen flashing under the kitchen light. Clara picked it up, stepped into the dim stretch between the hall and laundry room, the door left half shut. A whisper slipped out, thin as thread, cut off here and there by wind slipping through the window frame. Mark hadn't meant to listen, but the words carried to him anyway, sharp as the edge of paper. "Be tough, just like I was back then." Silence followed. Only the hum of the fluorescent bulb and the clock hand dragging to its next mark. The words were small but heavy, like a shard of glass behind the ribs, brushing him with every breath. Mark sat in the armchair, eyes fixed on that half-closed door, then turned away, back into the living room. He tried folding that glass away with small gestures, straightening the paper, adjusting the lampshade, pulling the blanket higher over Emily. His silence, this time, wasn't a whole swallowing anger. It was a tarp thrown over a fire so it wouldn't flare at the wrong time. Dinner came late and plain. A reheated bowl of soup, steam rising thin as mist down the side of an old bowl. A basket of bread cut rough, the dry holes packed like stars. A glass of water at the left hand, spoon on the right, napkin folded in quarters. The note on the fridge still stared down with its block letters, unchanged. Emily sat at her spot, shoulders drawn up, as if afraid of the chair back. She kept her head low, spoon tapping the side of the bowl every time she dipped. The small ring of metal against porcelain rang sharp. She ate fast, like someone somewhere was counting down. Every swallow jerked her throat. No tears fell, but her lids blinked too quick, too often. Mark sat across, his throat tightening as he watched. He knew that pace eating like survival. He'd carried it himself for years. But seeing it on a child's face, it felt like something had been stolen too early. Clara returned slow, set the phone face down. Her thumb tapped the edge once before she let go, the way people jam a memory back into a drawer. Her mouth tightened, her eyes flicked to the clock, then to the paper on the fridge, like looking for orders already written. The air held still, stretched fine as a violin string yet to be played. Mark drew a breath, 4 in, hold, 4 out. He shifted the small things, pulled Emily's bowl out of the harsh white light, into the warmer circle of the lamp. Moved her water closer by half an inch, turned the rim so the old lip mark faced away, as if wiping more than glass. Broke a piece of bread into tiny bits, set them where her hand could find them without lifting her head. Emily still ate fast. Spoon still clinked. So Mark tried something else. He lifted his spoon, blew on it a long while, then set it down, waiting. He didn't stare at her. He watched her shadow in the broth. Her small shoulders rose and fell. Then he lifted again, blew, waited. His rhythm, slow, steady, somehow caught hers. The clinks began to space out. She wasn't swallowing fire anymore. She was swallowing mist. Nobody told her to slow down. Nobody barked the opposite of the fridge's orders. Just a man modeling patience until it turned into the air itself. Clara poured water, the sound like a hidden sigh. She sat upright, back stiff as a ruler. Her eyes slid to Emily's wrapped wrist for a second, then fixed on the table where Mark had left crumbs. Doubt flickered, then faded. The toughness she'd whispered on the phone, Mark understood now, it wasn't a weapon pointed outward. It was armor she wore each morning to get through days that asked more than a person had to give. Maybe back then, nobody had stayed long enough to model slow for her either. After a while, Emily lifted her eyes, a rare move, and met Mark's. Just a brush, then gone, like a fish hitting sunlight. But it was enough. Enough to pry loose the invisible nail in his chest. He gave her a small nod, like the kind you give a buddy across the field. He slid the bread basket closer, broke his half in two, set the extra by her plate. His way of saying, "Here, nobody's taking your share." Clara leaned her chin into her hand. The phone buzzed again under the other palm, lit with a name, then died. She didn't pick up. The short ring left a faint circle on the table like a watermark. Something weary crossed her face without asking permission. Mark noticed the tendons standing sharp in her hand, the knuckles tight as buttons stretched too far. He didn't add weight to the moment. He went back to his spoon, blowing, waiting. The paper on the fridge curled at one corner from steam and heat. The corn magnet slid down a hair, stopped. Just that paper willing to bend, Mark caught it. Rules, even in houses, slipped when heat touched them. He didn't need to rip it off. He needed to keep the room warm, steady, long enough. The meal carried on in a new pace. Emily slowed. She paused between bites, sipped water with two hands, set it down quiet. She bit bread, face loosening for half a second, like remembering the smell of a bakery on the corner years ago. Mark saw kindness come back through her nose, not words. Clara dabbed at her lip with a folded napkin, neat as print. She glanced at the clock. Minute hand past 7. The line on the fridge about housework done by 6 was already expired, overrun by time itself. Nobody punished. Nobody spoke. Tonight, the paper was just paper. Mark stood first, carried his bowl to the sink. He ran the faucet soft so it wouldn't splash, laid a rag at the bottom so porcelain wouldn't clang. He wouldn't break the new rhythm with sharp noise. Then he came back, hand open toward Emily's bowl. She held on a beat, then let go. He caught it, gave a small nod, thanks spoken without sound. Clara gathered napkins, tight, tossed them away. Passing the fridge, her finger touched the curled corner of the paper. She smoothed it flat, held it a second, then let go. It stayed, but its edge no longer cut like before. She turned, shut a light. Her face, in the yellow lamp, looked less sharp. Mark washed dishes in the way of a man used to outdoor work, steady, no rush. Soap, rinse, drip dry. He stacked them spaced, so air could move. Emily stood by the doorway, still clutching her blanket. Her sleeve brushed the paper on the fridge, rustling it. She flinched, but stayed, watching water run. Be tough, just like I was. The words returned, but softer now, like driftwood on warm water. Mark understood, toughness might have been the shell that saved Clara once. But for a child trying to believe in a dinner table, that shell turned into stone walls. He couldn't knock them down in a night. But he could open a window, let in heat, let soup and bread do their old work, teaching people to slow down, to feel safe enough to chew. The courthouse sat at the end of the old brick street, lined with buildings that looked like they'd been standing for 100 years. The air that morning was raw, the wind cutting across the gray stone steps, swirling dead leaves before pulling them into the alleys. Mark climbed the stairs slow but steady, coat buttoned tight, one hand gripping a folder and the old laptop he'd come to trust as his only proof. Beside him, Mrs. Henderson leaned on her cane, her face tense but firm. Behind them, Sarah Monroe carried a stack of attendance sheets, her eyes locked on the heavy wooden doors ahead. Inside, the room hushed a notch as the doors closed. Harsh white light fell from overhead lamps onto long wooden benches and the faces of townsfolk who had come to watch. The judge sat high, stern, tapping the edge of a file. To the right, Clara was already seated, navy dress, hair neat, her smile sweet enough to pretend nothing had ever gone wrong inside that house. Mark set his papers down, sat, and kept his eyes on the empty space in the middle of the floor. His heart pounded, but his face didn't show it. This wasn't a battlefield, but the waiting felt the same. You never knew when the shot would come, only that you had to stand your ground when it did. The hearing opened with routine words. The gavel cracked sharp. Clara's lawyer stood smooth, talking about a devoted mother, small misunderstandings blown out of shape. Each word tried to paint over the truth. Clara sat angled just so, smiling gently, drawing nods from a few in the gallery. Mark stayed quiet, his fingers laced tight, nails pressing white against his palms. He waited. Then it was their turn. Peter Collins stood, his voice steady, not loud, not showy. He began with just one line. "We have video." A low murmur rippled, then silence as the screen dropped. Mark clicked once. The picture filled the wall. Backyard, yellow porch light, Emily on her knees, small hands trembling to hold a stack of bricks. Clara's voice cracked through the speakers, sharp as a whip, "Hold it. Don't let go." The room froze. People leaned forward in their seats. The judge's hands stopped tapping. Sarah gripped her papers tight. Mrs. Henderson bowed her head, her fingers shaking on the cane. Clara's smile twitched, held on, but stiff now, more mask than charm. On screen, the bricks shifted, one fell with a hard clack, Emily's body shivering against the cold stone. The video ended in black. The silence after was heavier than any shout. Peter placed a hand on the file. "This isn't feeling. This is fact." His words dropped solid, one by one. Sarah rose, her voice low but clear, "I'm Emily's teacher. I've seen her absences, her fear, the marks on her wrists. I will testify." Then Mrs. Henderson stood, holding the rail of her cane. Her voice shook but carried. "I saw that child in the rain with no one opening the door. I saw her on her knees, clutching bricks. I'll tell it all, under oath." Every word struck like a chisel into the wall of lies. Clara kept her face smooth, but her hand twitched under the table, her ring clicking faint against the wood. Mark sat still, but something eased in his eyes. He wasn't alone anymore. Last night he'd been the soldier before the screen, holding the truth in a cold hard drive. Today, in that courtroom, he wasn't a soldier standing alone. He had witnesses, other eyes that had seen, other voices willing to speak. The judge's gavel came down with a crack. This time, it didn't make Mark flinch. He felt the fire in his chest steady, not rage, but a slow, lasting burn bright enough to light the way forward for his daughter. The last sound of the video still echoed in everyone's head, the sharp clack of the brick hitting the ground, the cold shout, the sight of a child on her knees under a yellow porch light. The courtroom sat heavy and silent, as if the walls themselves had swallowed everyone's breath. No coughs, no whispers. Only the slow tap of the judge's gavel against the desk, marking the wait before a decision. The judge looked over the file, then at Mark. His eyes, worn from years in the law, carried both fatigue and a trace of pity. He drew a deep breath and spoke low. After reviewing the recording, hearing the witnesses, and considering the best interest of the child, the court grants temporary custody to the father, Mark Holloway, until a full hearing can be held. The gavel struck 3 times. The sound cracked through the room like a release. Mark sat there, hands locked tight, feeling the blood rush back to his chest. He lifted his head. His eyes stayed dry, but his chest trembled. Sarah pressed her hand to her chest and exhaled. Mrs. Henderson dabbed her eyes, her cane shaking slightly as a quiet smile spread. Across the aisle, Clara's sweet smile was gone. Her face drained pale, lips pressed tight, fingers gripping the edge of her dress. The smooth confidence she had carried all morning collapsed into silence. Then, from the back row, Emily rose. Her small legs trembled as she walked toward her father. Each step on the wood floor sounded louder than it was, like a knock on every heart in the room. Mark stood. He opened his arms, not rushing, not shaking, just wide enough. Emily ran into him, burying her face in his chest. A muffled sob broke free, soft but sharp enough to cut through the silence. Her tears soaked his coat, warm as release. Mark's hand moved slow across her back, covering the whole of her small frame. He said nothing, only lowered his chin to her hair and waited until her breathing settled. In that moment, he wasn't a soldier bracing for battle. He was a father, holding shelter for his child. The room stayed quiet. No one intruded. The silence itself became a shield, circling around the two of them. The judge's voice came one last time, gravelly but firm. "This hearing is adjourned." Chairs scraped, people stood. But up front, Mark stayed seated, arms wrapped tight. He knew this was only the first step. There would be more hearings, more paperwork, more fights ahead. But for now, his daughter had a place to cry, to let go, to stop being afraid. And for him, that was enough to keep standing. He opened his notebook and wrote. Day, temporary custody. Emily held tight. Tears, release. When he closed it, Emily's small hand was still gripping his. And Mark knew, for the first time in a long time, she wasn't afraid of losing that hold. The street sloped down toward the river, bare trees casting long shadows across the wet pavement. At the end stood a two-story brick place, walls peeling like old skin, windows wide and worn. That's where Mark chose to start over with his daughter. The wooden door groaned open, letting out the smell of old timber, faded paint, and damp. Emily stepped in first, clutching her teddy bear, eyes wide, not with fear this time, but with a careful kind of wonder. She stood in the middle of the empty room, sunlight pouring through the big window, her small shoulders lit up in the dust. Mark set his old suitcase down and dropped onto the floor. The boards creaked loud. He let out a short laugh, rare for him. Hear that? This floor's gonna sing to us every time we walk. Emily pressed her lips tight, then took a few steps. The creaks answered back, and for the first time in days, a shy smile broke across her face. Mark felt his chest ease. He opened the window. Cold air rushed in with the smell of leaves, river water, and a trace of wood smoke. But it was clean. No sour milk on the floor, no shouts echoing through the night. Just air, and room to begin. He spread a mattress for her, straightened the corners, set down a washed pillow, pulled up the blanket. Emily placed her teddy in the middle and ran her hand across the fabric. She looked up as if to ask, "Is this home?" Mark nodded, smoothing her hair. Dinner was canned soup and bread from the corner store. No table yet, so they sat on the floor, bowls resting on a carton. The crooked lamp threw their shadows long across the wall. Each spoonful warmed more than their stomachs. Emily ate slower now, not rushed, her eyes beginning to lift. That night, Mark sat by the window with his notebook. He wrote. Day, moved in. Old walls. Singing floor. Light pouring in. Emily smiled. Cold wind equals freedom. Outside, the streetlights flickered. Inside, Emily slept wrapped in her blanket, bear tight in her arms. Her face was calm, free of worry lines. Mark breathed easier, as if that same clean air had filled his lungs too. The place was small, cracked, creaking. But it didn't matter. Peace didn't have to be perfect. It just needed windows for the light, and arms strong enough to hold on. Mark leaned back, eyes closed. In his ears, no shouts, no fear. Just the soft creak of the wood floor, a song of a new home, carrying fresh air into their lives. That afternoon, sunlight cut through the big window, laying stripes of gold across the creaking floor. The kitchen was just a corner with smoke-stained walls, but the light made it warmer than it looked. On the old table sat a mixing bowl, flour, a few eggs, and a carton of milk. Emily stood on a chair, hair falling in her face, sprinkling flour with clumsy little hands. Dust rose, landing on her hair and sweater. Mark gave a low laugh, brushed her shoulder, and she pulled back, giggling. The sound filled the room. It had been a long time since he'd heard that kind of laugh, not nervous, not forced, but real. He let it sink in. Crack the egg, he said quietly. She tried, shell broke, some spilled onto the floor. She froze, waiting. But Mark just tossed the shell in the trash, no anger, no lecture. She smiled again, stirred with the wooden spoon, shoulders easing. Flour streaked the table, her arms, her nose. She laughed louder, and something inside Mark loosened. The kitchen smelled of sugar and heat when they slid the pan in the oven. Emily leaned on the chair, eyes bright. "It's rising," she whispered. When the cake came out, uneven and cracked, she grinned and broke off a piece for him. Mark nodded after one bite. Sweet, a little burnt, but the best he'd ever had. In his notebook he wrote. Day, kitchen. Laughter. Flour in the air. Cake cracked but sweet. Emily equals light. She sat swinging her legs, crumbs on her lips, smiling. Mark watched, his eyes softening in a way they hadn't in years. Outside, evening fell red against the wall. Inside, a child laughed, and a father felt lighter than he had in a long time. Morning in the little apartment began with the creak of floorboards and white light spilling through the wide window. Emily woke early, bare feet on the cold wood, sweater hanging loose as she ran. She found the sketch pad and colored pencils Mark had bought at the used bookstore down the street. No one told her what to do. She sat by the worn wall and started to draw. Mark was making coffee when he heard the scratch of pencils. He walked over and stopped. On the thin sheet taped to the wall was a crooked house, a smoking chimney, and in front of the door, two figures, one tall, one small, holding hands. A square window glowed yellow, bright against the white paper. He stood frozen, coffee cooling in his hand. Old memories pressed in, shouts in the old house, spilled milk, cold nights. But here, on this fragile page, Emily had drawn a different home, small, with light in the window, with two people standing side by side. Nothing more needed. He touched the edge of the paper. It fluttered with the breeze. His rough finger traced the roofline, stopped at the two figures, childish lines, shaky, but clear, a father and a daughter. "This is our home," Emily whispered, teddy bear in her arms, a sleepy smile on her lips. Mark only nodded. Inside, it felt like a knife had finally been pulled out, leaving a scar, but not the pain. Yesterday's laughter in the kitchen, today's drawing on the wall, they were stitching pieces of life back together. He set the cup down, opened his notebook, and wrote. Day, drawing. House. Two figures. Window lit. Emily taped up another picture, this time a table, a chair, a moon outside the window. The colors were messy, but full of life. She looked up, asked, "Can we draw the kitchen too?" Mark smiled, picked up a crayon, added a crooked stove. Emily filled in the fire with yellow, the chair with green. She laughed. By noon, the wall was covered with houses, trees, moons. But the first picture stood out, the one with two figures beneath the lit window. Mark stared at it for a long time, hand pressed to the page. This time it wasn't habit. It was a promise. To keep that window lit, to never let Emily's drawings turn into the dark memories he carried. That afternoon he wrote one more line. Drawing on the wall equals trust. Emily doesn't draw shadows anymore. When night fell, the lamp cast its glow on the paper. The yellow window in the drawing blended with the real light in the room. Mark sat there, watching, letting it sink deep, replacing the shadows of his past. Night fell over the town like a heavy blanket, muffling every sound. In the small apartment at the end of the street, the yellow lamp lit up the drawings taped to the wall. A house. Two figures holding hands. A window glowing bright. Childish lines flickering in the light, whispering something simple. Home can start on a scrap of paper, as long as someone believes in it and holds on. Mark sat in the wooden chair by the window, notebook open on his knee. The pages were filled edge to edge, every detail, every bit of proof, every small moment. He turned to the last page, let the pen hover. There was nothing more to write tonight. The evidence was there, the witnesses had spoken, the gavel had come down. What stayed inside him now was only quiet. Emily slept on the mattress, teddy bear in her arms, face soft, her lashes moving with each breath. Every time he saw her sleep, Mark knew the truth. The real fight wasn't in the courtroom, or in the files, or in the video. It was right here, keeping a child asleep without fear, without being jolted awake by a shout, without kneeling on a cold floor for some small mistake. He set the pen down and wrote slowly, carving the words deep. Don't turn away from a child's silence. He looked up at the wall. In the drawing, the window shone bright, untouched by shadows. He laid his rough hand against the thin paper. Cold, but steady. It was a reminder, not just for him, but for anyone willing to read, to listen, to bear witness. Mark knew, if Sarah hadn't spoken, if Mrs. Henderson hadn't found her courage, if he himself had stayed quiet, Emily would still be living in darkness. A child doesn't cry out with loud words. They do it with silence, with downcast eyes, with a spoon rattling in a bowl. And when adults look away, that silence hardens into chains. He closed the notebook, palm pressing against its cover like holding weight. The words inside were evidence, yes, but also a journal of the path he had taken, from fear, to awareness, to resolve. Outside, a thin moon cut through the clouds, laying pale light across the empty street. The town slept, but Mark stayed, like a night guard at his post. He knew life would test them again, more hearings, more questions. But he also knew he wasn't alone anymore. Sarah. Mrs. Henderson. Peter Collins. The townsfolk who sat silent in court. They had all seen. He looked once more at his daughter, then switched off the lamp. Darkness filled the room, except for the little drawn window on the wall that still glowed. It stayed, like a small beacon. And the question hung in the air, not from his lips, but from the silence of the story itself. If it were you, would you be willing to be that witness? The room settled back into quiet, broken only by the steady breath of a child sleeping safe. And in that quiet, Mark understood, sometimes a single voice, a single steady gaze, is enough to change the course of a life. That soldier found his home in his daughter's smile, not through loud victories, but through patience and a heart that stayed. The story closes with a small light in the window, yet it leaves us with a question: are you willing to pause, to listen, and to be a decent witness for a silent child?